welcome to Tales of Honor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to telling the true stories of every recipient of the Medal of Honor. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales of Honor Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to telling the true stories of every Medal of Honor recipient. I'm your host, Christoph Ambrose, and today's episode is number 250. Not only does it wrap up the month of October, but it wraps up the series on double Medal of Honor recipients. There's 19 in total, and while one was covered earlier in the podcast lineup, the other 18 got done during the last 2 months, so go back and listen to them if you happen to miss any of them. Today's episode is going to take place during the Indian Wars, and before we get into that, if you head on over to the Tales of Honor Podcast Facebook page, today at 5 o'clock, President Trump will be awarding Master Sergeant Matthew O. Williams his Medal of Honor. There is a link on the Facebook page that will take you to the White House's YouTube stream. Obviously, I do record this ahead of time, so I have not heard this yet, but future me will, and hopefully future you will as well. But that's for another day, and keep an eye on social media to see what the next 2 months will be covering. But for now, let's move on with episode 250. And now, a tale of honor. William was born in 1847 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Before the age of 18, he had left Pennsylvania and joined the 4th U.S. Cavalry, the mounted force of the U.S. Army, in October of 1865. This was 5 months after the American Civil War had ended, but he spent most of his enlistment time in the Midwest. William was stationed at Fort Sill, in what is now Oklahoma, and at Fort Concho, in what is now San Angelo, Texas. Fort Concho was only staffed by less than 24 mounted soldiers, and when they received word that a group of Comanche had stolen cattle, they responded, and it was William's actions that would earn him his first Medal of Honor. The citation reads, "At Colorado Valley, Texas, March 28, 1872. Date of issue, April 27, 1872, in pursuit of a band of cattle thieves from New Mexico." William and his group had ridden all night in order to catch up to the Comanche by the next morning, and they were able to capture a Mexican teenager that was with the Comanche. Information was obtained that uncovered Comancheros and New Mexico smugglers that had been supplying to Comanche tribe members, which the U.S. government had deemed those members hostile. William was later interviewed by a Washington newspaper regarding the event. "In about 2 hours, I had the entire outfit, burnt their saddles and camping outfit, capturing their stock and bringing in 1 prisoner, killing 2 and wounding 3, without the loss of a man or horse in my detachment. We returned to Fort Concho, where we arrived on the morning of the 13th, having ridden 120 miles in 54 hours. 6 months later, William was part of a larger cavalry force that had come upon a large Comanche settlement with about 280 lodges and about 800 people. Now, you have to remember that at the time, the U.S. had deemed them a hostile threat because they had become known for waging war on the European settlers and other Native American tribes, as well as the enslavement of those captives during warfare. Obviously, this podcast is not here to discuss the rights and wrongs of history, but it can be hard to look at history through the lenses of our modern glasses. With that said, William ended up taking charge of his section after his superior had been rendered incapable of continuing, and they went on to kill 100 members of the tribe, burn the village, and seized 3,000 ponies. They ended up taking 130 members, whom were mostly women and children, back to Fort Concho as prisoners through the winter. His actions that day earned him his second Medal of Honor. The citation reads, "Distinguished Conduct in Action with Indians. Awarded at Red River, Texas, September 29, 1872. William was one of 9 to receive the Medal of Honor for that day. He would take a break from the Army to return to Philadelphia to work as a railway superintendent and then return to the Army in 1882. William was back with the 4th U.S. Cavalry and was the acting superintendent of the Sequoia National Park in 1894. He was diagnosed with stomach cancer in November of 1895, and the following month, after shaking hands with every member of his unit, William died on the 22nd of December, 1895, shortly after noon. William Wilson was buried on the 24th of December, 1895, with military honors in the San Francisco National Cemetery, Section W.S., Plot 527. And that was a Tale of Honor. Thank you for listening to Tales of Honor Podcast. Please head on over to talesofhonorpodcast.com where you can read these stories, see other ways to support the show, and easily share a story with your friends and family. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to talesofhonorpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Christoph Ambrose. Thanks for listening.